Okay, hello everyone and welcome to day 2 of the STAN Student Festival. Over the next 14 days we are, I suppose, highlighting the theme of climate and forced migration. So essentially all the events that we're hosting over the next 2 weeks really kind of speak to the issues of climate change and how they are impacting communities around the world. So we're really excited about this event in particular because we have a really incredible lineup of speakers who you will be introduced to shortly. But before we do that, just to, I suppose, thank Irish Aid who support us in bringing events like the STAN Student Festival to students. So without them, we wouldn't be able to hold these really important discussions. We also have a few kind of student societies who have collaborated with us tonight for this event. So UCC Environmental Society, UCC Vulture Refugees, Trinity Environmental Society and Trinity BDP. So thank you guys for helping us bring this event together. What I'm going to do is we obviously have, as I said, a great lineup of speakers. You might be kind of tweeting or putting up posts on Instagram or stories or whatever throughout the event. So if you are, feel free to tag both STAN and any of the speakers as well. So what I'll do is I'll actually pop the kind of the speakers handles in the chat box there so that you guys can kind of follow them and kind of tweet at them if you'd like. We also will use this chat box for any questions that you guys might have for panelists. So feel free to drop questions in at any time and I'll be keeping an eye and we'll have a bit of a Q&A session towards the end. So I suppose that's kind of it from me, but I will introduce you very quickly to our moderator for tonight, Amali Tower. She has an extremely impressive resume, and in order to do her justice, I'm actually going to read her kind of short blurb because I don't want to forget anything. So Amali Tower is the founder and executive director of Climate Refugees, which is a human rights organization that calls for the protection of those displaced and forced to migrate because of climate change. Amali has worked for over 15 years to promote the protection of refugees and forcibly displaced persons in a variety of contexts, including in refugee settlement, protection, evaluation and research with the UN Refugee Agency in Kenya and Jordan, with various NGOs in over 18 countries throughout Africa, Asia, the Middle East and the US, and within the US State Department's Refugee Admissions Program. Her organization, Climate Refugees, has conducted field studies in the Sahel in the Lake Chad Basin, examining the impacts of climate change on conflict and forced migration in a crisis that has now displaced approximately 3.5 million people within that region. In addition, Amali's personal journey and struggles as an immigrant impacted by conflict and instability herself really fuels her work. And years of interviewing refugees fleeing conflict and persecution has afforded her the chance to also hear their stories of fleeing climate change. So through this, Climate Refugees was born. So without further ado, I will hand you over to the incredible Amali to start tonight's discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanne. That was very sweet of you. Thank you to you. Thank you, Stan, for the warm welcome and for inviting me and this great honor of participating in this conversation with these incredible and committed activists that we have the immense pleasure of hearing from today. We have an amazing lineup of expert panelists that I want to introduce to you tonight. So, first, we have Jacqueline Catalina Schaeffer. Jacqueline is Inupiaq, I hope I said that correctly, and she is from Kotzebue, which is a city in the Northwest Arctic borough of the state of Alaska in the United States. She is the Senior Project Manager for the Division of Environmental Health and Engineering at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. She has worked in comprehensive planning, energy, housing, and water and sanitation in rural communities across Alaska, utilizing a holistic approach to project development. Her passion has led her to infuse traditional Inuit knowledge into strategic planning to change the top-down approach into a locally driven grassroots approach. Her current work includes innovation, sanitation solutions for unserved communities, tribal resilience adaptation planning, and community engagement for community relocations due to climate impacts. She studied interior design and sustainable building in London and the US. We also have Jannie Staffansson, who is from the Arctic Circle in Sapmi. Also, hope I pronounced that correctly, which is from the northern part of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. Now, Jannie is Sami, which means then to belong to the indigenous peoples of Scandinavia and northwest of Russia. She is from a reindeer herding family and currently focused on strengthening her indigenous knowledge in relation to reindeer herding, knowledge that is needed to survive the extreme impacts of climate change in her region. She has a background in environmental and organic chemistry and also serves as a consultant to Sami organizations and communities in relation to climate change, capacity building, and indigenous people's rights. She has served as an advisor on environmental and indigenous people's rights issues and participated in negotiations of the Indigenous Peoples Platform within UNFCCC throughout the Paris Agreement process. Jannie was a member of the Arctic Council Working Group and served on the board of the Sustaining Arctic Observation Network. We also have Hindou IBRAHIM, who is an environmental activist and geographer. She is the coordinator for Indigenous Women and Peoples of Chad, which goes by the acronym AFPAT in French, and served as the co-director of the Pavilion of the World Indigenous Peoples Initiative and Pavilion at COP21, which is the Conference of Parties, right? COP21, COP22, and COP23. In 2016, Hindou was selected to represent civil society at the signing of the historic Paris Climate Agreement. Hindou has been recognized many times for her contributions in this work, including the 2017 National Geographic Society Emerging Explorer, BBC's 100 Women, and she is one of 17 people appointed as an advocate of the Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations. And lastly, but certainly not least, is Genevieve Jiva, who is from Suva, Fiji, and she is the coordinator of the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network, which goes by PCAN, the Pacific Regional Node of CAN International. She has been a member of PCAN since 2015, participating in their activities and advocating for stronger action on climate change. She has graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in History and Politics and has completed a postgraduate diploma in Diplomacy and International Affairs from the University of the South Pacific. She's also a member of 350 Fiji and has participated in Peace Boat's Ocean and Climate Youth Ambassador Program. So as I said, I know we're all virtually applauding all four of you. As I said, an amazing panel. So I don't want to waste another minute. So let's get right to our conversation. And I'd like to begin by asking each of you to tell us a little bit about the work that you do and how climate change is impacting your specific communities. And if it's okay, Genevieve, may I start with you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Amali, for the introduction. And good morning, good evening to everyone, wherever you are. My name is Genevieve. As you said, I'm from Suva, Fiji. I'm currently the coordinator of PCAN, the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network. And PCAN currently has 130 member organizations in the Pacific. We're based in Kiribati, Tuvalu, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Fiji. And we work across the region with our members, partners, and allies to champion Pacific leadership on the climate crisis, and amplifying and supporting our members on the ground and jointly developing policy asks for influencing in national, regional, and international spaces. So currently PCAN, with the COVID crisis, has been working virtually, mainly with our members supporting activities on the ground because the Pacific at the moment, thankfully, is not as affected by COVID as other areas of the world. And so we're still able to do activities face to face, which is really wonderful. Last week we supported, 2 weeks ago, we supported 350 members in their Climate Week of Action. We had a number of activities around the region. In Fiji, we held Vela Mani Week, which was a series of activities around Talanoa, which is open discussion in Fijian here, and artivism and planting of seeds in a community garden. And then eventually we launched a community fridge, which is meant to be part of our just recovery work with 350 in ensuring that we are building resilience for ourselves by ourselves. And so in the Pacific context at the moment, we are seeing quite a lot of impacts. We have been for quite a while. This region is considered to be at the front lines of the climate crisis. And so among the things, along with climate forced migration and relocation, which we can already see, we are facing increasingly intense cyclones. We had a Category 4 cyclone earlier this year in April, which was exacerbated by COVID impacts. 2 Category 5 cyclones in 2015, 2016, and we've never seen that before. Coral bleaching events, king tides, a number of really devastating impacts that are both slow onset, so that are taking time, and extreme weather events. And these slow onset events, including sea level rise, are quite concerning, particularly for our low-lying island communities, Kiribati and Tuvalu, who are no more than 3 meters above sea level, and could have to face migration in a few years if we don't take climate action as soon as possible. So I don't want to take up too much time. I'd love to continue having the conversation. Thank you, Amali.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Genevieve. No, that's an extremely excellent overview of what the Pacific Island states are facing. So thank you for that overview, and I know we'll definitely be fleshing some of that out as we go on. Jannie, may I maybe go to the Arctic?
Yeah, good evening from Jokkmokk, from Sápmi. And thank you, Amali, for the introduction. And I'm very pleased to see my co-panelists here. I recognize many faces. So I used to spend quite some time focusing on research and trying to figure out how the world was intertwined with everything. And doing that took me to work on climate change issues, of course, because that was my driving force, being born in a reindeer herding family and being the generation that grew up with climate change. The changes we saw in the Arctic started 30 years ago. And everything has been changing quite fast. It is temperature-wise, the poles are changing fastest. And in Jokkmokk, we already have a change in 3 degrees Celsius in the mean temperature where I live. Being from the Arctic and indigenous peoples of the Arctic, we are, of course, people of winter and snow and cold weathers, but also many seasons. We have 8 seasons here. And those seasons are all important in terms of vegetation, in terms of herb and food for us and for all the biodiversity that's living here. And the animals that are in this area, they are extremely affected because of the fast change in temperature. We see quite much of invasive species, and the species that are adapted to a cold weather and climate, they are struggling. So the reindeers, they are in particularly focused on being able to survive in the cold climate, with the fur actually being holy and so it sustains a lot of heat, and they can regulate the temperature on their legs if it's going to extreme weather in cold, so that they won't be affected. But the heat is something that they can really handle. And with that comes, of course, struggle for them, but also struggle for us, because we can see how they are affected by this. Their body can't take it, they can't handle it, they get sick. And with invasive species and a changing climate, they also bring with them new diseases. And that's something that we have been seeing the past time, which actually got me to try to focus more on being home with my family, trying to assist and adapt with my community, needing to educate myself in indigenous knowledge that is disappearing with the weather, with climate, and with our elders. So that is what I'm doing right now. I really try to, or I need to educate myself in the knowledge and know-how of my people before they are gone, and to be able to adapt and survive in this changing climate.
Wow, Jannie, that's so powerful, because I mean, you're speaking about, you know, cultural loss as well, you know, through climate change. I mean, something we'll get into more as we go on, but yeah, that is incredibly striking and powerful, and incredible work that you're doing. Thank you for that. Jackie, I will pose the same question to you. If you can tell us about the climate impacts in your community in Alaska.
Kaya ubangata kakatalinya. So Jannie, I'm so excited because I grew up with reindeer as well in Northwest Arctic. That was one of the, when we had our caribou had a cycle of sickness, they brought over reindeer to help us with the change. And so we still have active reindeer herds. So I grew up with herding reindeer as well. So I am Inupiaq, and I grew up in a traditional lifestyle, Northwest Arctic, across from Russia. No, we could not see Russia, but I grew up in a very traditional lifestyle without any modern infrastructure. So our water came from ice blocks, and we too are very seasonal people. So our connection to the land and to the seasons is vitally important to our survival. So when you have a culture of people who have been in the same demographic area for, geographic area for over 17,000 years, you wonder how they adapted and how were they able to survive. We have stories of a time where it was summer all the time. So every season was summer. So to us, it's not a frightening thing. It's an adaptation in a modern world. The difference between our communities, which we have 229 tribes in our state, 11 distinct cultures, and over 200 dialects of languages. Really, Alaska in itself is a comparison to Europe because of the diversity of our cultures. And most of our communities are coastal or on the river system. And because of the temperature rise and the sea level rise, all of them are impacted. We're seeing in some communities as much as 25 meters overnight taken by climate impacts. We also have permafrost, which is frozen ice soils, and some as deep as 1,000 feet, which is, I'm not sure how many meters, but, and when you think about that, when that ice in the ground melts, you lose, all you have is this little grains of sand. And so you lose hundreds of feet overnight. And so it's very, that piece is very frightening if you live on a river community where there are homes along that river and they could be gone tomorrow. And so the unpredictability of climate impacts and the severity of it, the urgency because of this rapid change in the modern world, we aren't able to just transplant people. Our people were very migratory. We traveled with the seasons and we traveled with the food resources. So we're very connected to the land, air, and sea. And with that, the dynamics of how we think is very different than a Western mindset. And so understanding that our survival is hinged on that mindset of an Indigenous knowledge base, it really makes how you adapt very differently. One, you have to first help people understand what that mindset is and what seasonal thinking is and what seasonal lifestyle is. And then two, you have to interject the science where it's applicable. We have elders who go back, we go back storytelling 7 generations in one sitting. And when you think about that, 7 generations of any Indigenous population that you could capture that knowledge and continue to adapt and evolve is really vital to that. But helping science and research understand that and the importance of it, and then integrating it is really where we're at. We have over 100 communities that need to either relocate or adapt in some way, shape, or form, or lose their communities altogether. And in that, you have layers and layers of governmental land designation and regulations that prohibit timely adaptation. Whereas in the past, we could just simply move. And these communities on the coast and on the rivers were summer camps. They weren't year-round villages. They were just summer camps where you harvested during that season. And so it really is a very difficult thing to explain to somebody who doesn't understand that the displacement of people has been happening for, you know, hundreds of years in Alaska and other parts of the Arctic as well. And that displacement not only loses pieces of the culture and the language, but it also takes away something, that connection to the land. And that, you know, we have a saying that we don't simply exist on the planet. We are, we coexist with everything else. So everything has a spirit. And so we coexist with the trees and the animals. And so when you talk about the reindeer, you probably feel like you communicate with them. Well, and so we feel and think the same way. But that in itself is very against everything Western Christian values believe in. And so it's very difficult because you have to somehow not, I don't know what the word is, but maybe not offend, but help others understand. And so the work I do at the Tribal Health Consortium is focused on that. The modern infrastructure is obviously energy and water and sanitation, access to safe drinking water is something that is vitally important, because as these communities are lost to sea, they lose all that infrastructure, and there is no mechanism right now to replace it. So basically they go from a piped regular running water to having to haul it, you know, haul the ice again. So they're reverting back, and there's no funding mechanism to replace it. And so we have people not only displaced, but having to figure out how to live with no modern infrastructure. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, yeah, it's fascinating to think that you're, after all this time with Alaska being a state of the Union, which is, you know, the United States, that you're still bridging understanding and information and cultures. Rather astounding. You know, I mean, I'm not surprised, and yet it's still shocking, you know, to think of in real terms. Thank you very much, Jackie. Hindou, I will ask you the same question, and also maybe broaden it in the interest of time if you want to expand as well. The question is, you know, if you could tell us a little bit about, you know, your work and specifically how climate change is impacting your communities and impacting forced migration possibly in the communities in which you work. Thank you.
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see everybody, and I'm so happy to see you, my sister Jannie. I can like just shut up and don't call your name. Jackie, so good to see you, Genevieve. I'm coming from the opposite side of the Arctic, hearing from my two sisters said there. I am coming from Sahel regions. So it's my region, I mean, my country have three landscapes. So we have 100% desert, only you can see the sun and the mountains. And we have the Sahel and Savannah regions. And then we have the tropical forest because we are part also of the Congo Basin, just to give you the idea of where I come from. And my community, I mean, my peoples are still, most of them nomadic. And when I say nomadic, it's really like living 2 days in one place, 3 days in another, maximum 1 week in one, and then the entire life we are living like that. So we can move up to 1,000 kilometers a year, just working after our cattle. So we do not have rangers, maybe they cannot get adapt, but we have cattle. And my people who are Mbororo, we are called it after our cattle because the cattle call it Mbororoji. And why I tell you that, because my community is still living in 5 countries and now moving to 6 or 7. So Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria, and Central African Republic. My direct relative, like my uncle from my father and my uncle from my mother, they are living in those countries where I have like the direct cousin who have a different nationality. So just to tell you how the colonization cut our land and make us that where you are born, you just like belong to this country that they called. So it's just like less than 60 years. That's how it is shocking. So then when we are nomadic, we are moving to follow the pathway of the rain. So when the season moves, we move with the season. So that's why we are still moving around all the places. And our way of life help the ecosystem to get regenerate in a natural way. So that's why we are moving always because of this fragile ecosystem. And when we come to the climate change impact, we also experiencing that, like when I was young, it was 30 years ago. When I was young, all the different species that we have as birds, insects, as flowers or herb, who exist. And then the kind even of the birds that I play with, because we do that as children, do not exist anymore. So then when you are growing up in the community that have them life and livelihood, depend from the rainfall, depend from the ecosystem, and you are seeing this ecosystem disappearing in your eyes. So you have just like your duty to fight for your peoples. So that's why I'm fighting for my communities. And I do the fight in 2 ways. At the local level and national level, where I help my community to get adapt and mitigate to the climate change by using our traditional knowledge. I'm so happy that my two sisters, Jannie said they have like 8 seasons, and people think maybe just in Arctic, they have summer and winter. It is the same in my land. People think only we have like rain season and dry season, that's it. But no, we have our season depend from the place we live. So the place who is in the Sahel, I tell you, we have 6 seasons. And from the Sahel, when you go to the southern place, to the tropical forest, we have 7 seasons. And all our seasons are very important because they are related to our life. So we know each season that related with the wind that's coming, with our cattle that moving with the disease, or how we can heal from it. And this work, it's not understood by the science, and Jackie touched on this one. So they just think about what they see with them eyes, but we are thinking about what we live with for a centuries, how we learn from it, and that's how we also build our resilience and protect our communities. But yet we are seeing with this climate impact, I give you the concrete example of the lake that we are camping during the dry season around the Lake Chad. So the students who are there, they can Google it to see Lake Chad. It used to be in 1960 when my mother was young. So it used to be 25,000 kilometers squares of water. And now actually it is only about 2,000 kilometers squares. So 90% of this water just evaporated, because there was no other activities going around it. And then suddenly we have like more than 40 million living and depending from this ecosystem, including my community. And the consequence is, of course, the poverty who increase. Community fight among themselves to get access to these shrinking resources. But our topic, the migration. So we do have the internal migration that people move from one region to another one, and then they move up to another town in other countries. And those who didn't get the resources, especially the young peoples, they wanted to see the better features, and then they can jump to the sea and come to the Europe. And when we see that the European try to close all the door and seeing, it is pity, yes, it is pity for them to host other peoples. But how about the destruction they did in our life that we didn't benefit? And then we have to force ourselves to become a migrant without, with the colonization they create, with all the development they use, all the resources they use, and they create the climate change, and we are the front line. So the migration internally is much huge than the externally. And the women and children that left behind are becoming elders for themselves. They have to play the role of man, the role of woman, and they have to be the guardian of our identity, of our culture. They have to create and innovate even without going to school. And then quickly in the second work that I'm doing, because it is not us who taking the decision, it is not our countries who taking the decision in all the climate fight. So it is the international level. That's why I'm working also at the international level to try to build this platform to make the voice of my people and other indigenous communities to be here, to be listened, and then maybe our rights can be respected. But it is not an easy game, because at the international level, I just have a call this morning also with the High Commission of Refugee. They do not use the term of climate refugee or environmental refugee. They try to say like, no, please, if you can avoid, do not say this term, because they don't want to recognize. Why? Because it's developed countries who control all the UN agencies, and they choose the wording that they want. And they just wanted me to shut up on the things that I saw with my eyes and I live with in my communities, to do not define the climate refugee or environmental refugee. Did they have a response to give to my peoples, to give to Fiji, to give to Arctic, to give to all our communities? Did they really know what we are living? I'm like, fine, maybe you cannot write it in your report, but I have my mouth to say that there are peoples who are climate refugees and who are environmental refugees. And among them, our peoples, indigenous peoples, are part of those forced displaced communities.
Hindou, I cannot thank you enough for that. You may have missed, Hindou, that obviously my organization, which I founded, is called Climate Refugees. I have worked for years under the framework of the 1951 Refugee Convention for UNHCR, for many NGOs, for the US State Department's refugee program. So I'm well aware of the challenges that you're talking about, and the limitations of international law in this regard. And when I founded this organization, the first place I went to is the Sahel, to the Lake Chad Basin. And I interviewed both internally displaced people and refugees. And Hindou's absolutely right. I mean, I don't need to even tell you that, but you know, if it's not an outcome of colonization to interview refugees or IDPs, which stands for internally displaced persons, and when you ask people where are they from, they will identify as Lake Chad. They don't say Nigerian, Chadian, Cameroonian, because these are Western constructs, right? Nations with artificial borders. We're talking about indigenous people who have for millennia come from the Lake Chad Basin and who are now dealing with the impacts of environmental degradation, but also conflict, also gross underdevelopment, political marginalization, disenfranchisement, and a lot of, you know, socioeconomic, political, and now conflict and environmental drivers. So with that said, I'd like to ask all of you whether you see other drivers at play in each of your regions as well. Obviously in Hindou's case, just as I've said and she's said, you know, the Sahel is a very specific area that's very much in the news, and we're all aware of a conflict, and maybe everyone that's listening isn't as knowledgeable, and it's something you can easily Google, the Sahelian crisis, or you can look at the conflict that's ongoing with an insurgency with Boko Haram. These are just things you can Google. But you know, every other region in the world, there may not be a formal conflict, but forced migration or even migration, which is voluntary, you know, might always have multiple drivers. And I'm wondering if that's the case in any of your regions. And if I'll pose the question to anyone who would like to answer that. If there are other factors and drivers at play here as well, besides climate change.
This is Jackie. You know, we have in Alaska only limited road systems. And so logistically that becomes another challenge, because we have communities in our interior on river systems that have 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer and -70 in the winter. So you have these extreme weather variances that almost prohibit some infrastructure. So it's not just governmental, it's also logistics. And so logistics also plays a role in the cost of construction for moving people, as well as moving infrastructure or improving infrastructure or even building infrastructure. We have over 30 communities that still don't have basic water and sanitation needs met. So when you're dealing with that and the challenges, modern technology just coupled with climate impacts just doesn't work. There's a saying that if you put a steel pipe in the tundra, and the tundra has permafrost degradation, that who's gonna win? The steel pipe, which is your modern infrastructure, or Mother Nature? And Mother Nature will win every time. So sometimes it's other things. So logistics, and very site-specific logistics, and very site-specific climate change issues. So the temperatures certainly prohibit some of that. And now they're going more extreme. We have hotter summers, longer summers, and then we have our cold, short winters, which it affects everything, you know. And as people of the ecosystem, if it affects our animals and plants, then it's affecting us, because in Alaska, our rural communities depend on our natural subsistence lifestyle. We do not farm or have any type of agriculture. We simply live off the land. So the food resources are provided, you know, and they have been for millennia. So we don't necessarily have, so that to me is that's a strength. Somebody asked earlier about the children. That's the inspiration, is that our people for 17,000 years have survived this. The stories of having, you know, summer season all year round, they survived that. Our traditional culture has survived a lot. And so when you think about that, this little glimpse in time, even though it's accelerated impacts, you're looking at a sliver in time for my people. And so we have to remember that. That's the inspiration, is we're in this little tiny sliver in time. It's not like 17,000 years and here's 100 years that this is gonna win. You know, we have this. And so it goes back to the analogy of modern infrastructure on the tundra. You know, who's gonna win? In the end, Mother Nature wins. So we have to have that dance and that respect and honor for our planet. And I think all of us could speak to that, because Indigenous people have that intimate relationship with nature. And that would be the inspiration, is that even though we have these challenges, to remember that, you know, we have that intimate relationship with nature.
So well said. Does anyone else want to tell me about anything regionally specific? You know, just jumping off of what Jackie said, you know, about logistics and so some of the like economic, you know, impacts, secondary impacts, right, that climate change may pose that then force people to move as well. You know, I'm wondering if you're seeing outcomes like that as well, that it may not seem obvious that there's an environmental or climate component that's forcing someone to move, you know. And so therefore, what's tricky about all this is to assign, you know, the correct driver, the impetus that forces someone to move, because there's never, even in situations of conflict, there's never just one driver. You know, I've never seen that. So I'm, you know, I would just kind of, this is a great opportunity for all of us to hear about, you know, your specific regions and things that you may have seen. If anyone wants to add anything, please feel free.
Yeah, I can speak to some of that, I think. And thank you to all my sister before. It's really, really inspiring and comforting to hear your miseries as well. The struggles that we share across the world. No, but for us, of course, colonization happened quite early on. And we are still under colonization. Not only our minds, but also our land. And unfortunately, climate change adaptation is one driver. Not only are we relocated and dislocated because we need to migrate where we can find food for the reindeer. And then also with colonialism shutting the border between within our nation. So we have been migrating and we have been following the reindeers, and we still must do that with the struggles to come. But then you also have other factors of renewable energy, for example. In the beginning of 1900s, they started to build these mega hydropower dams in Sweden and Norway. And of course, it wasn't indigenous people's lands. Putting our homes and our pasture underwater, making the water and ice on the water during winter time extremely dangerous to transport on. And unfortunately, the river system during winter is our transportation system. We are depending on that. It's our infrastructure, and it's disappearing. So we are, throughout the winter season and springtime and fall, we are on the land with our life at stake. And that is something that we all live with. And recently, the other forced relocations are due to windmill parks. Sweden and Norway are building huge windmill parks on indigenous people's lands, destroying some of the areas that are untouched by colonialism, not by us, it's not wilderness, we live there. But they refuse to put the energy that they want and need to be able to live their very comfortable lives where you need the energy, around the cities. Why don't put it in the places that you've already destroyed biodiversity? There's no biodiversity there. Put it there. Put it alongside all of the roads that you have in the entire countries. Put it alongside the industry that needs the energy. Let them pay for their renewables. We have paid enough, but because of this, we have ongoing court cases all over Sápmi due to that. And it is the driving force of the Paris Agreement. And it's difficult to try to adapt and survive with climate change, but also try to fight as a community against renewable energies, knowing that you also need it, or that you need others to need that instead of fossil fuels, but also having to pay for it with your lands, with your reindeer, with your family members, maybe with yourself. Yeah.
I think, Amali, I wanted to jump on what Jannie said. It is not only like human migrant, as we are so ego, we are thinking just about human species. She's completely right. It is about all the ecosystem migrations. And that is what is happening in our land. We are seeing it. And I mean, as I am a member of the Permanent Forum, I know one of the renewable energy that they wanted to set in a Sami land in the Nordic country. I read the report, and when I ask the government about it, they say they ask an expert to do the report, and at the end the report is rejected, but because there was a lot of things going around who is not clear. I'm like, if the expert of the land are the Sápmi who are there, it is not you who decide of someone sitting at the office because he know how to write and read. He's called director. He can come and define what is the clean energy in the land that he do not know. So it is not about the migration of the peoples only, it is the migration about species. And one of the example, I visited also a Maasai land in Kenya. And then when you go to the Maasai Mara, you go out, you can see they put down a heat water for them to produce electricity. I met the communities that they displace. They build for them like a fake village. Why I call it a fake village? Because they build it a village like the home of the town that they are, and they put them all around these places. If you wanted to buy just like a bread, you have to walk over 15 kilometers to go out of the park to get access and buy things. So they lock them down in a box. And what is happening in this project, you can, I saw it by my eyes, a giraffe who just lock in all those tunnels they create to pass the electricity. So the animals are not free to migrate, even for them, even they don't have a passport. So it is not just a human, it is also all our species who are in danger of migration.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, very, very good of you to point that out. So well said. Let me ask you all maybe one last question before we open it up to questions from our audience. And maybe Genevieve, if you don't mind, I'll go to you. You know, I've read a lot of the work that you all have done directly with policymakers and you know, at the national level and at the international level. And I'm wondering what you might all have to say about what could the UN, the international community, and even, you know, some of your own domestic policies, but maybe let's keep it at the UN international community at this point. What could they do to better include Indigenous voices in climate negotiations and discussions going forward? How do you see that? Has it been sufficient? Could it be improved? Where are those places do you see?
Thank you, Amali. I think for me, and something that I've seen in the work that I've been doing over the past few years, is that the first thing that needs to happen is we need to be seen. And so for me, the Pacific is often, it's so invisible in international spaces. I've seen official world maps that don't include defined countries in the Pacific. I've been to conferences where my nameplate has had my name, and then where my country should be has had other, because there weren't enough people attending. I've seen international relations textbooks that don't have a specific chapter on the Pacific, and international news organizations that don't have a Pacific section on their website. And all of these things sometimes leads me to believe that if we're not seen, then how can people care? And so I think the international community needs to understand that there are, the Pacific makes up a third of the world's ocean, and we are 530,000 square kilometers of land within 165 million square kilometers of ocean. We are large ocean states, and we come into international spaces often being considered small island states and poor and powerless, and we're trying to change that narrative, because we do come in with solutions, with thousands of years of culture and history and indigenous knowledge and science that our communities have been using to survive. And so within the international space, what we try to do is elevate those voices, is ensure that we're putting a human face on climate change, ensure that we're centering not just impacts, but also the incredible resilience that is happening in our communities, the change in the agricultural cycles, and how communities are responding to including renewable energy, and how they're responding also to international pressure. And one example that I wanted to give before I finish around this is how often neocolonial thinking adds to or exacerbates suffering. And so recently there was an article that Australia's Foreign Affairs Department has been thinking about what they call a grand compact with countries like Kiribati, Tuvalu, Tonga, and Nauru, where they say that they will offer citizenship to these countries if they need to move because of climate change, in return for managing their exclusive economic zones. And so trying to then recolonize, trying to continue profiting off of a problem that they have solved rather than addressing the problem, there are multiple layers that we have to fight against. And so we try to do that by ensuring that our voices are being heard, ensuring that the stories from the islands, the lived realities are being amplified in as many different places as possible. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Genevieve. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that is the danger that we see neoliberal policies neocolonial policies sort of, inject into solutions as the way forward. And it's one of the reasons why I am very deliberately using a term that the international community has rejected, because it is to place responsibility on polluting nations. While, as I like to say, to refute the term refugee because it doesn't fit the legal definition is completely fair. But to advocate use of the term migrant, which has absolutely no legal definition, and in fact invokes a voluntary nature, is thoroughly perplexing to me in a situation of forced migration. So if that doesn't speak to a gap in a protection and rights, then we as advocates need to make it explicitly clear. So, so that's my little 2 cents on that. I really want to thank you all for that, and maybe we could now pivot to some of the questions that our audience has. I would be remiss to not point out that clearly we're also in the middle of a pandemic. So while we're dealing with the climate crisis, we're also dealing with the COVID crisis. And I'm wondering if you've seen the climate crisis exacerbated by the COVID crisis, because certainly we've seen that, refugees have paid a higher price, and so I mean, that's not to say that it's the exact same situation, but by my point being that marginalized communities or anybody on the fringe or vulnerable, tends to get overlooked, shall we say. So I'm wondering if you've seen exacerbations then, and then also whether you see lessons learned that can be applied in the climate crisis from things that we've learned thus far in handling COVID. And I'll open that up to anyone who'd like to take the question.
For sure, it will be differently impacted COVID from all the communities, and especially from the region that we are representing in the panel. But I give you the perspective of how it's happened in my region and especially in my community. So when COVID came, it's come overnight. And then what was happening for us, the communication that was coming from every corner of the government institutions. So we have, during one day, 5 to 10 decisions coming from the ministries, from the hospitals, from the presidencies, that giving a lot of information. Even if you are in town, you have a TV or radio or internet, you get lost. And in the community level, there are not information that going there because they design the system, and I think they experience really what they design. They design the system that adapt only for them way of life, who increase the inequality and who exclude those who are not in the system that they want. Because in Chad, we have like French and Arabic as national languages, and all the information going only on with those languages. In my communities and many other indigenous communities, we do not speak those languages. Even if you speak them, you do not have access to the TV or to the radio. So you are excluded from all the daily information they take. And one of the information was lockdown of all the communities. So when the lockdown, there was no market, no public place. Of course, we don't have hospital in our place. We don't have a school in our place. Maybe we don't care about them. And then they established like the rules of social distancing and washing the hands or whatever. So in our communities who are depend from the daily life where they go to the market today in order to buy the food for tomorrow, so they completely cut our life. It is not the COVID who kill us, but the consequence of the COVID. So people cannot get to the market. Like when we have a milk, you milk today, and then when you make it into the yogurts or butter, it's just for tomorrow because it's so hot, so you cannot keep them. You have to go to the market in a daily basis to exchange your product for the onion, for the cereal and all. And people got locked down. So they cannot get access to the market. They cannot buy any cereals. And then the food insecurity come in all the communities. And they don't know what the reason that they cannot go out. And secondly, when they establish that people need to wash their hands, I'm always making that in the panels on the COVID. People who do not have access to the clean water to drink, how they can wash them hand with the soap, which kind of gel they can get. So it have been a complete disaster. 3 weeks ago, the map of hunger 2020 by the World Food Program that come out, show it Chad is the most vulnerable. You look at the African map, in the middle you have only Chad who is in red, dark. So we increased by 35% of food insecurity. The reason is because all the economy is based on the daily exchange, and all that are killing our peoples only so badly. And what we do, like in my organization, what I did is only like calling the community chiefs every day and telling them what is happening, try to explain to them even the things that changing every day. I do not understand how I can explain better for them. And then I try to struggle, get like a mask for them, and then go to the communities, and then they lock all the spaces. You cannot go out from the town at all. And at the end of the day, you see how when you are marginalized, you become more marginalized again. And all the crises, climate change, COVID, environmental degradation, human rights violation, the most vulnerable are the most impacted again. The inequality and justice, it's more and more in our communities. And it's at, again, poverty to poverty every day. And then they come and telling us that we are designing a better green recovery for all. It's really like a nightmare for me. I'm like, we don't have even the information. You wanted to include people on the green recovery. What does green recovery mean? So for us, it's how they can act on the crisis that do not have a mask, the crisis that do not have a vaccine. This is the climate change. We cannot wear the mask or close the border or just lock down people from the climate change. The seasons are not waiting for us. The rain season continues, the dry season continues, the winter continues, the ice is melting, everything continues. While that, they're just focusing on COVID. So that's why climate change is the main issue for us. If we destroy nature, Jackie said it well, Mother Earth responds. We destroy nature, she destroys us, and she will get recovered with or without us. And that's what is happening in our communities. It's very sad. And to jump quickly in your last questions, from our communities, we all use our traditional mechanism, traditional governance, to put our elders aside, to put the youth aside, and to use the traditional medicine that we have, the women who take care of everybody as they are the doctor of all the communities. We continuously lying down in our traditional knowledge to help us. And then I think they need to think 2 times before to talk about the green recovery, how it can go and touch our peoples and make it fair for us. Otherwise, we continuously doing the same mistake. And this pandemic, it must be a working call for all the world to understand the world is not ending only in the towns, but the communities who live with the environment are the best one who will do all the resources to recover from climate, from COVID-19, and maybe other pandemic that will come soon if we didn't act now.
Absolutely. Wow. So well said, Hindou. Thank you so much. Such a comprehensive answer, and yeah, absolutely the truth. Jackie, I think you want to say something?
Just real quick, I just was thinking about this as I was listening to you. Our communities, because of the logistic challenges and the lockdowns, had to revert to our traditional methods. And so what I saw was a return of the traditional medicines, which we harvest off the land, which due to colonialism was, abolished. Very few keepers of that knowledge. But what this did was allow them a platform virtually to share that knowledge across regions in our state. And so I saw in a Western mindset, you go self, family, community. In an Indigenous mindset, you go community, family, self. You're part of a bigger picture. And so what I saw was that mindset shifting, which to me was the inspiration, right? Because when the Spanish flu hit Alaska, there were communities that were completely wiped out. So some of our elders were children when that happened. So they remembered. And so they said, we have to lock down and we have to harvest these traditional medicines that we know work. And we have to work as a community to get the meat and fish and share it. So the mindset shifted. And so to me, we don't have the large populations like other parts of the world, but what it did is it allowed space for people to recognize inward to their traditional knowledge, even though maybe they weren't taught it, but it was in their DNA. So it woke something up. And that to me was the inspiration. The part that we have to recognize is we have some communities that are having major outbreaks due to COVID. They lack water and sanitation, so they can't wash their hands on a regular basis because they don't have running water in their homes. So how do we adjust and shift to that? Well, it's really been interesting because even in those negatives, which you would think would maybe exasperate COVID, it did the opposite. Their shift of making sure they had enough water to wash their hands to prevent it changed how they thought. Their human behavior changed. And so that's something that, maybe because we have the smaller populations, we're able to recognize that. But I would say to everyone in the audience as well is consider shifting that mindset to your community. And really, what are the behavioral changes that are positives? Because those will help us the next time something happens. And to me, it's allowed me that space to kind of list those positives and negatives. And even though the government doesn't, every day it's a different approach. And so it's confusing to everybody. But if you think community-wide and you go back to your Indigenous knowledge, which we are very fortunate to have, then we can mimic nature and recover just like Mother Nature would, right? And so I put that hope out there that even in a city, I have seen traditional healers come out of the woodwork, so to speak, and help other community members recover from COVID with traditional medicines. And that to me is the inspiration of hope, of our future, of teaching the next generation why that Indigenous knowledge is so important, and not discarding it as storytelling. We get that a lot. It's just a story, it's not history. No, it's oral history. And we need to value that, and we need to strengthen that voice and bring it to the UN and show the world the importance of this type of platform. Because one, look at us, we're all women. We're all healers. We give back to the community in ways that are not recognized in the world we live in. So I am very inspired just by being here. Thank you.
Jackie, that was beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And I'm very moved by what you said. And I think that's the most wonderful segue into maybe a question that I'd like to ask all of you, and Jackie, while you're at it, I'm going to start with you. What do you think in your experience then is the best way to communicate these issues to a younger generation who may want to get involved, right? What's your advice for them to take these on in their communities without being discouraged? But, how do they take this on? How are they going to be the next generation's activists with positivity and encouragement?
Well, I'm always inspired by the youth. It's in the world we live in today, if you have access to a cell phone, the distractions have become great because children tend to navigate towards that. So fortunately, I live still in a place where nature is accessible. And so that would be my my inspiration and hope for the youth today, is to get into nature. Even with COVID, isolation doesn't mean you can't go walk on the grass and feel the energy of the earth. You could walk barefoot on the grass or on the soils where you live. You could thank the ancestors that walked there before you. There is power in that. You know, you breathe in the air and you think that we live where we still get to breathe in the air. There are some things that we don't just necessarily think about. We tend to take for granted the breath of fresh air, the feel of the sun on our skin, the feel of a breeze, you know, walking on soils and thinking for thousands of years there were others who walked before me. And so to me, that reminder is, this is a good time for that. You know, especially when we're asked to socially distance. You may not be able to hug a person, but you might be able to hug a tree. And there is energy in that living organism, and you're a living organism. And when you interact, there is an energy that is never mentioned in Western education, right? But it's our survival as a being within this ecosystem called Earth. And so, you know, and look up the night skies, you know, the sky people dance for you, you know, look in the water, the reflections are there. So again, it goes back to that mimicking nature. We are simply become the wind, become that sunlight that you feel on your skin, and become that inspiration. So the voice of youth has to be powerful, but it has to be acknowledged first. It has to be valued. You know, we value, and I hear it intertwined with everyone speaking, our elders and our youth, right? Well, this is the week of our Elders and Youth Conference in Alaska, and it's where our elders share the stories and the oral history so that the youth could engage. Provide those platforms. Allow your elders to tell the stories virtually if you have to. Share that knowledge with the youth. Their inspiration will only be what they know, and they only know what we teach them. And so become that teacher. Even if you're just the conduit of that knowledge, allow them that space.
Thank you. Oh, that's so lovely. I think we might have just under a minute left. Joanne, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Jannie, Genevieve, or Hindou, if you want to add anything, but as we're closing here.
One of the things that might be easy and simple from what all of us have been talking about, that is community. What one can do to fight climate change and to assist us is take care of your community. Because in the Western world, they are all focused on what you want to do, what you want to accomplish. It's even that you need to take some you time, and that is incorrect. You need to take some community time with your community. You need to spend time with your sisters. Do a fire, gather. If you don't have fires or being able to be outdoors, put a light on. You need to gather with your community. And if you don't have a community, you need to create one and then take care of that. And that structure is also the structure that you need to be able to draw from when it comes to climate activism. Because if you're young, there will come a time where you need to walk the streets. You need to go into the streets and protest, and it's unavoidable. Because for us Indigenous peoples, we live so close to nature. We are seeing everything that we love dying or already dead. And for those who are not that correlated or having nature around you all day long, you don't have to go get there. If you now get on the street and protest, you don't have to get to where we are at now. But you need to organize, you need to have a community, you need to have the community strength and get the energy from that to support each other and lead. Everyone needs to be leaders.
Yeah, I think totally agree with Jackie and with Jannie. They concluded to us. So just what I can tell to you, it is our battle. It is the youth battles, not only Indigenous people's battles. So fight. Don't let them decide in your place. Decide for the future that you want, and you can do it. Don't let them define what you want. You can define yourself. And by doing that, you will helping us. So I think Jackie, Jannie, thank you for concluding. We save time.
I just wanted to add to this and say, I completely agree also with everything that's been said. For us, we try to work as intergenerationally as possible, just as we can't look to the future without learning from the past. Our youth leadership is only strengthened if you bring along the wisdom and teachings from our elders. And for young people, whenever we go into a space to try and engage them, you need to remember that nobody can tell your story better than you. And you are living in this reality, and you will be leading our actions to fight it. And so get involved. You are our leaders.
Oh, simply wonderful. I am so inspired and moved by all four of you, and I just want to, on behalf of everybody listening today, from the bottoms of our hearts, thank you for all your incredible work for years and years and years. And your commitment and your dedication is remarkable. So thank you to all of you. And thank you also for allowing me this great honor of sharing this time with you. And I will turn this over now to Joanne and the wonderful people at STAN. Thank you on behalf of all of us for having us here tonight with you.
Thank you, Amali. And just to echo, I suppose, what you've said, you know, to Jannie, Genevieve, Hindou, and Jackie, thank you so much for such a thought-provoking discussion. Really, really inspiring. Just the work that you do is so incredible, and I hope that the attendees kind of feel the same, and they're feeling empowered now to really go and take some meaningful action. And Amali, thank you so much for moderating the discussion. It was just really, really great. And honestly, I could have sat here all night. I was really, really just interested in that topic and the discussion. And I think we really could have gone on forever. So I do appreciate everyone taking the time to be here tonight. We do have, I suppose, 18 or so more events coming up actually over the next 2 weeks. So we will kind of continue this discussion in different formats. And I have put a link for all the attendees to the full event guide there in the chat box. So feel free to scroll through and see what other events you might be interested in. I've also put up there a SurveyMonkey, a feedback form for anybody who wants to give some feedback on this event tonight. That would be really appreciated. But yeah, just thank you again to our great speakers. It's just so wonderful. I suppose one of the highlights of moving the festival online this year has been the opportunity to bring speakers from around the world together and to really hear those firsthand experiences. So thank you so much for joining us from where you are, and I hope everybody has a really lovely night or morning for Genevieve, because I know it's Wednesday morning over there for you. So thank you so much again, and hopefully see you guys again soon.
Thanks, bye.